Now, there's a big anniversary in Irish sports, certainly Irish GAA, the 50th anniversary of the end of Rule 27. Rule 27 known more commonly as the ban. Everybody knows about the ban, which in effect banned all GAA members from playing or watching non-Gaelic games. Plenty of victims of the ban, as we'll hear, including the first president of Ireland, 1938 to 45, Douglas Hyde, who had the temerity to attend Ireland against Poland in 1938. Liam Brady, I know a lot of people know, famously expelled from St. Aidan's Christian Brothers School for captaining the Irish under-15s, and plenty more people besides. So April 10th, 1971 is when all of this stopped. To fill us in on the ban and its ultimate ending, very happy to welcome, as always, Paul Rouse, Professor of History at UCD. You're very welcome.
Thanks a million, Joe.
I know there's loads.
It didn't quite end on the 10th of April 1971, so we should come back to that at the end.
Okay, right, okay. I was just blown away. I'd known about Liam Brady. I had not realised that Douglas Hyde had been banned for going to see Ireland against Poland. That one just hit me with a, you're joking.
It's an extraordinary story, all told, all parts of it. It's a story which wraps Irish sporting history around Irish history in general, but it was played out at the very highest level of government with Douglas Hyde, and at the very lowest, most local level of Irish sport, the intimate club games that were played across Ireland for many decades. So it's a story that reaches all parts of sporting and indeed political life in the country.
Let's start at the end and set a context then, because it is the anniversary that we're marking. So let's start with the end, or most of the end, as you've said. It's not fully the end. Pat Fanning is the president of the GAA in 1971, and he wasn't so happy with this move, but he had no choice, really. Is that the general point?
Pat Fanning was a very decent, hardworking, committed GAA member who gave a life of voluntary service to the association. But on that 10th of April 1971 in Queen's University, Belfast, the first time GAA annual Congress had been held in Belfast, he made a speech that he did not want to make, having walked to a podium in a walk that he did not want to make. And in that speech, he said, this Congress 71, is fated to pass into the annals of the GAA as one of the most critical, divisive, and indeed historic assemblies since the dawn of the association in 1884. In a short while now, you will acknowledge the express will of the association and delete a rule, which for many of us, and this is an important line, was a rule of life, not just a rule of law, not just a rule of sport, but a rule of life, and epitomized the very spirit of the association. And he asked the question, and this feeds into what we'll talk about afterwards, the manner in which the ban didn't quite end on the 10th of April 1971. The rule deleted, what then? Do we then reject the past and with deletion proclaim ourselves a mere sports organization? And that explains the rearguard action that emerged around the ban afterwards. And I suppose, is it worthwhile, Joe, actually looking at what exactly the ban was? Because we like to think of it as a ban on foreign games, playing and attending foreign games. It was a lot more than that, though.
Right. Yeah, no, please expand, because that's what I understand it to be. You can't watch a game and you can't certainly play a game, and that was the end of it.
So it was basically a group of rules that were put together. And the first rule is any member who plays, attends, or helps to promote rugby, soccer, hockey, or cricket. So it was 4 games, 4 foreign games, inverted commas foreign, thereby incurs automatic suspension from membership of the association. And the reinstatement of offenders could only be granted by provincial councils on recommendations of county committees, basically county boards. And the recommendations are subject to the following provisions: attending games, at least 3 months suspension; playing or promoting such games, at least 6 months in the case of a first offence, and 2 years in the case of a subsequent offence from the date of the last offence. And then it says this rule should not apply to people who've never been members of the GAA. So you had to have been a GAA member for it to matter. And that's the first thing. But if you were not a member of the GAA and you wish to join, you could be admitted for membership, provided you hadn't played foreign games for 3 months before you sought to join the GAA. So even if you'd never been a member, there was a kind of a cooling off period. We'll call it a decontamination period for the sake of the conversation. Now, How is this rule policed? This is the next part of the rule. The chairman of each county committee, of each provincial council, and of the central council, that is every single significant administrative unit within the association above club level, must appoint vigilance members for the area under their jurisdiction. The duties of such members shall be to visit centres within the county, province, of area where excluded games and entertainments are held, and to report to the chairman of the county committee, through the officer responsible, the attendance of members of the association as players or spectators. So basically, there were vigilance committees set up and working to keep an eye on who was going to either dance or going to games and all of these. There's a further layer or two further layers to it. A council, committee or club shall not organise any entertainment at which foreign dances are permitted. Now, a foreign dance is a very interesting description of what might be involved, and we'll again see that a little bit later when it comes to practical action. It also said no club shall hold a dance until it shall have submitted its programme of dances to the county committee and until that programme has been approved of. And the penalty for a breach of this rule shall be suspension of not less than 4 weeks. And finally, British soldiers, Navy men, or police shall not be eligible for membership of the GAA. A member of the association participating in dances or similar entertainments promoted by or under the patronage of such bodies shall incur suspension for at least 3 months. So no soldiers, no Navy, no police allowed to come in. And if you go to a dance organised by those, then you're banned from membership of the GAA. So that's kind of the complex of rules that is known in shorthand as the ban on foreign games.
They're very hot on the dances, aren't they? Who knew?
Well, it's a very important thing for the Gael to be able to dance appropriately and not be doing anything that might again contaminate while dancing.
Right. Okay. Well, we'll come back to that then. Do you want to start with then? So how this all came into effect, the history of this thing, because I know there were a few efforts to get it off the ground pre-1900.
Yeah, we'll do this bit, I think, pretty quickly. There was an introduction of a rule in the middle of 1885, basically 6 months after the GAA was established, saying that if you were a club and you were playing under soccer or rugby rules, you could not be a member. Your club could not join the GAA, or you could not play against such a club. Yeah. And that basically was an attempt to get GAA clubs to affiliate. And it was also an attempt to get those clubs who were wavering between playing a bit of soccer and playing a bit of rugby to actually join the GAA. So it had a very particular purpose. That was extended then. Sorry, there was also a rule on athletes not taking part in events organised by non-GAA athletics organisers. Again, that was an attempt to get athletes to come in. And then in 1887, there was the introduction of a ban on British police, on RIC being members of the Royal Irish Constabulary, being members of the GAA. And this was to do with the land war that was ongoing in 1887. It was to do with evictions that were taking place during those years. And it's really interesting. That rule also was clearly not to apply to British soldiers or Navy. So it was specific to the events that were taking place in terms of eviction. Seems to have been the impetus behind it. Now, those rules were in place and put in place, and they were undoubtedly shaped by the fact that the GAA, the presence of the Irish Republican Brotherhood, the IRB, a secret revolutionary organisation dedicated to the overthrow of British rule in Ireland, the IRB had taken control of the GAA by the end of the 1880s. Now, what happened then was that IRB supported Parnell during the Parnell split. The clergy left the GAA. The GAA almost folded in 1892, 1893. 3 counties attended the annual convention. Few counties entered the championships. Most didn't organise club championships. And the GAA almost collapsed, very, very close to collapse. A new generation of officials came in. The IRB guys largely drifted out, one of whom, by the way, was the great grandfather of Max Malins, the English rugby fullback during those years, Peter J. Kelly from Galway. And a new generation came in and got rid of all of that suite of rules in the mid-90s. Okay. So that's the kind of the initial phrase. The GAA wrapped itself too tightly around nationalist politics and indeed around revolutionary and separatist politics, and the organisation nearly died because of that.
Okay. So at the turn of the century then, this new generation of officials come in and they put the rule in largely as we knew it?
So the generation that rejuvenated the GAA in the middle of the 1890s was kind of swept aside by a new broom. Then a new generation came in at the start of the 1900s, more nationalist in aspect, more culturally nationalist in aspect, and set out to draw what Harry Boland, Michael Collins's great ally until the Civil War, that is, to use Harry Boland's great phrase, it drew the line between the garrison and the Gael. Okay. And the idea was the introduction of that ban on the playing or watching of foreign games were between 1901 and 1905. It was brought in, it was initially to be kind of voluntary, then it was temporary, then it was being moved out, but it hardened by 1905. And other rules were added to it around prison wardens and magistrates up till 1911. Dances were then added in, and you have the modern suite of ban rules largely in place by the time you get to the War of Independence of 1919 to 21.
And what was the language around this, and how, strongly was it phrased? And because I was flicking through your notes, and in certain quarters, soccer players derided as Orange Catholics and West Brits and some of these terms that we all know. Was that very much part of the vernacular, or was that not, wasn't quite that extreme at official level?
Oh, at official level, it was brutal, and it was relentless, and it was really clear. This idea that Pat Fanning spoke about in 1971 about the GAA being more than a mere sporting organization, and there is something very profound about that word "mere" when it's put in that phrase. And it's what it said was that the GAA passed a motion, and it can be found in this motion from 1901, to say that the GAA's purpose is to crush English pastimes. That's the struggle that the GAA, and it used the word struggle, and it talked about, and this is a motion passed at Congress, that its ambition was to indulge and engage in a patriotic effort to make young men more thoroughly and essentially Irish and self-respecting. And we must say at this point that this is all men who are involved in the GAA at this stage. There's no ladies Gaelic football, and Camogie was about to be formed as a separate organization. But this is an idea that Irish manhood will be turned into foot soldiers of a revolution, according to this cadre of officials who repeatedly castigate soccer, rugby, and cricket. Not so much hockey because it's more marginal, but soccer, rugby, and soccer, rugby, and cricket really get it.
Okay. Secret police reports from the time noted, quote, "The general tone adopted by the leaders is hatred of England, and the games of English origin are decried." And as you've just said, the ambition, it was felt even in those secret police reports, is to get hold of the youth of the country, and should England stumble or be in difficulty anywhere along the way, we've got a ready-made army in effect.
Well, the modern special branch in Ireland put in place in the 1880s after, as many students of history or people who learn about it in school, two leading officials of the British administration were murdered in the Phoenix Park murders walking through the Phoenix Park, funnily enough, in the early 1880s. And the special branch then set about photographing and following leading Irish Republican Brotherhood members who were often, or sometimes at least, members of the leadership of the GAA, and following them around the country and what they were doing. Now, these reports are really interesting because there were informers feeding information in all the time, informers who were getting paid and, of course, had to justify their pay, and therefore were more than happy to tell stories repeatedly, whether they were true or not. And there's this growing level of hysteria around what is actually going on here and what might happen in the early 1900s and moving on through that decade. And the idea was that what you really have, this is just a cover. There are officials here using this as a cover, and they think that the GAA is going to be essentially stalking the foot soldiers of the revolution. Okay. Now, the reality of it was that there's a confusion between the rhetoric and the ambitions and the ideals of certain of its leading officials and the reality of the association as played out on the ground.
I'll bet. So, I mean, it's hard when I ask you these broad questions in like, give me a percentage or what was the majority thinking, because these, that's where there are limitations to your craft. But I mean, I can imagine the zealots thumping the table and telling each other how much we all hate the Brits, frankly, and, these Orange Catholics playing football are a disgrace. And then, like, the reality on the streets is there's just a bunch of lads who like playing Gaelic games and like swinging a hurley, and they're not that bothered either way.
Well, it's kind of useful to look at a town and what happens in a particular town as evidence of it. And Enniscorthy is a great example of it. And Enniscorthy should be looked at because Enniscorthy's the town in Ireland that really rose in 1916 along with Dublin. I know there was a bit in Ashburn, a small bit in Galway and Cork, but it's really Enniscorthy where they took over. And there were leading ideologues of the GAA in Enniscorthy, people like Paul Rouse, who pushed time and again. They abused, a guy, for example, attended a dance. Robert Hanlon went to a dance run by a rugby club and was then banned from the GAA. And then he attempted to come back in, and Paul Rouse said, what, he attended a rugby dance, and he thought he was doing nothing wrong. And Sean Etchingham, who was also a rebel, said, what class of a dance was he doing? Was it a tango? Is it like the tango? And the person who was there to represent Robert Hanlon says, no, it was a little above a tango. And Etchingham said he must come in here and express his regret and make an apology. And Keogh said, what is this association coming to? Here we have a man breaking the rules and afterwards seeking to be readmitted. So you would look at Keogh and Etchingham and say, these are two men absolutely given to revolution and to the words that they pronounce. Now, a very interesting thing happened with Keogh in particular later on, because he was for many years the leading official of the Red Rapparees Club. And his club was accused on occasion of breaking the rules. So, for example, their victory in the 1909 Wexford County final was objected to on the grounds that two of the Rapparees players were members of the British Army. And then in 1912, when Rapparees won another final, it was claimed that a member of the winning team, James Quinn, was actually a British soldier. Now, this was denied outright by Keogh, denied by everyone involved in it. But if you look at the census returns, now open from 1911, Quinn was indeed in the British Army and was by then a reservist in the army. So even the apparent zealots of the movement would do what was necessary to win a match. And that, I think that matters.
Yes. So there are infinite number of connections and complexities of small town Ireland where nothing is as neat and tidy as we'd like to suggest.
And as we all know, identity and rules will often be sacrificed in pursuit of victory.
Yes.
We know that. Yeah. We know that now. We know that then. And it's just a thing that people, like, for all the pious words, for all the pompous statements that people make, there are people who live up to them. There are people who absolutely adhere to them. But there are many others who can see a certain grayness around the application of
absolutely. Can we get a few South African lads in to play second row and we'll see how we get on in the match? It never ends.
Well, identity has always been, it's across international sport, it's across local sport, but even within the GAA, we talk all we want about the honour of the local parish and how, parish boundaries. From the very first All-Ireland final, we know this. People were bringing in players from outside clubs to help them win the game.
Yeah.
The Thurles team that won the first All-Ireland was filled from players from the parishes around them. The team they played against was an accumulation of villages from East Galway. And so it began and continued.
I do, remind me if we don't get to it, because I do want to get back to these vigilance committees who go to the matches to see if other people are going to the matches, because I have no doubt they were enjoying the matches as much as they might protest. I just think that's great that the vigilance lads are sitting there cheering on the rugby team like nobody's business. Guarantee you that was happening. But to stay somewhat chronological, we're sort of up and running here. I can see how the rules are, ingrained, and you've got the committee lads saying, how dare you go to a dance, which is just a comical scene from this vantage point. But then things do get serious in that 1916 happens and War of Independence happens. So around this time, I don't suspect they were of a mind to relax this ban, put it that way.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. The one thing about war is that it forces you to actually make choices rather than just talk about choices. And the GAA's history and the history of sporting organizations during the Great War, first of all, during the War of Independence, during 1916 and during the War of Independence, it means that there is an inevitable choice being made by the membership of the organization. And that choice could be not to take part at all. Just stand aside. It's nothing to do with me. I'm not getting involved. Or it can be to pick one side or the other and engage. And in the question of the GAA, we know at this stage that there were more GAA men in France during the Great War than there were, for example, in the GPO in 1916, for all the rhetoric that surrounded the organization. We know that there was an attempt in Laois, a motion brought by Laois in 1915. There were so many members of the GAA joining that there was an attempt made to relax the ban rules and say that, look, for the duration of this war, if lads are away fighting for the army and they come back, let's let members play. Let's let members of the British Army play. Now, again, that doesn't fit into the narrow cartoon history that is presented of us and them and good versus evil and green versus red, white and blue. That doesn't fit. Yeah. But it's just the reality of how these tangles of history that went through these years. But where things began to harden was after the Great War, after 1916, as you move into the War of Independence.
And could I interrupt briefly there, because, and again, I'm dealing with kind of a potted version of history, but certainly weren't people encouraged either by politicians or maybe the GAA or maybe both to go and fight for in Great Britain or England, whether you want to term it, in the Great War, because that was going to somehow be appreciated and paid back in some way? Wasn't there an official, yeah, you should go and help them out, or was it always like, no, don't?
John Redmond, the leader of Nationalist Ireland, hugely popular man, had delivered, it looked like, on the cusp of delivering home rule for Ireland. Now, of course, history has rewritten the story of John Redmond, and John Redmond is seen as is presented, and there's not one statue to John Redmond, for example, in Dublin city, despite his era. And of course, Redmond is a figure who's maligned by people who see him as someone who was willing to settle for home rule, and real independence was what should have been struggled for. But Redmond operated in the context of his times, and Redmond in the context of delivering home rule and trying to stop the partition of Ireland. And that really matters. Redmond called on Irish nationalists to join the war effort.
That's right. Yeah, that's what I'm remembering. Yeah.
So that's what happened. And
did the GAA take a position?
The GAA took a position that it had previously been calling for people to join the Irish Volunteers, which is the organization which Redmond drew on to send people to the things. But the GAA had a membership which was at its elite level, did not call on people to join the war effort.
Okay.
In fact, it went the opposite way increasingly, and it called on memberships just to keep playing their games. And there was a lot of, by contrast, rugby, cricket, hockey clubs all called on their membership to join the British Army.
Okay, so Redmond, looking for home rule, said go and help out. GAA at an official level said don't.
Yeah, or said nothing in certain instances. But at the same time, the GAA didn't do, at central level, did not do, with some of its more radical officials wanted to do, like Etchingham again, wanted rifle clubs set up in GAA clubs all around the country, because of course England's difficulty in the great cliche was Ireland's opportunity.
Yeah.
So it didn't do that either.
Etchingham sounds like a reasonable fella, but anyway, so we'll continue.
Etchingham is a show in himself, Joe. And
I'm sure.
Etchingham was a champion, was a leading jockey. He was a horse trainer. He's an absolutely extraordinary man. Was a newspaper journalist, sports writer, unbelievably interesting individual. But we won't get stuck on him.
Park him.
We won't put him here. What we should say, though, by the way, is that the GAA, after 1916, was accused of being involved in the 1916 Rising, and it issued a statement to say it's nothing to do with it. Now, you might say, okay, we'll have to issue that statement. Well, fair enough. But it then went and met General Maxwell, who's the man who organized the executions of the leaders of 1916, to arrange for special trains for GAA matches. And it went to Whitehall in England to arrange for an exemption from taxation. So it was in negotiations with the people, with the government that was there. So it wasn't an absolute rejection of the state by the GAA during those years. And I think that should be said in the context of the war.
Okay. War ends. How does the GAA react to all these soldiers coming home?
They come back in, and there's a problem with the rules in certain matches, and there's arguments, there's ban rules being applied to someone, and teams refusing to play because there's a British soldier, demobbed British soldier on the opposition team, and the opposition saying, well, we're not playing without him. He's one of us. He's just home.
Yes.
So you get a change in context, and then there's talk of a kind of an amnesty, and then you move into the War of Independence, and the GAA introduces a new ban, a new aspect of the ban, and that is that any civil servant who took the oath of allegiance, which is now every civil servant, cannot be a member of the GAA, and this includes people who have given their life working for the GAA and that's their job. They're civil servants. They work in the civil service. Many of whom actually trained by Michael Cusick in his civil service academy, where he provided grinds for people to join the civil service. Right. But now in this new dispensation, there's a huge conflagration over whether these guys need to stand aside because of the revolution. So the War of Independence is on from early 1919. It runs until 1921, and the GAA ultimately decides, it puts in that rule that you cannot be, if you take the oath of allegiance, you must stand down.
Wow. And I presume, would soldiers fighting in the Great War have taken the oath of allegiance?
Yeah, well, if they were banned anyway, so they were gone.
So there was no amnesty for them. Like,
no.
Can you step out of your? I know you can only judge people by the time they're in, and you're not meant to give your opinion. It's really rotten, isn't it?
Well, it's a tough scenario, in that it's the context is war, though. And the context is an organization which perceives itself and has indulged in rhetoric. And in many cases, there are people who believed in the rhetoric. But they sought to apply the rhetoric.
What about Johnny McGee, who listened to Redmond and said, I want this country to progress and I'm going to do it because he's told me it's a good thing to do. And he comes home and his life is GAA and his family are immersed in GAA and he's banned. It's horrible.
But he's left the army so he can come back in. It's whether he's left the army or not is the key.
Because I was confused. So if he finishes in 1918, even though he's been a part of the British Army and taken the oath of allegiance, once he's left, he's back in the club at GAA.
Once he's left, he's in the GAA club. Once he's not part.
Okay.
No, I should have explained that.
So it's not.
Once he's gone,
you have to be active. You have to be active.
You have to be active. Once you've gone from it, you're gone from it.
Okay. So the lads coming home from France, once they left the army, were back in at GAA level.
Yes, and there are examples, none of which are coming straight to my head at the moment, of people who did that. And like, there's a guy who played on Bloody Sunday, for example, had been in the British Army, and as we know, many of the leading, or at least several of the leading IRA men from the War of Independence had fought in the British Army.
Okay,
and now come home, they're demobbed to join the IRA.
Okay, I'm with you. So let's jump into the 20s a little bit and beyond. And partition has happened, and it's a very different place, obviously. When does this rule start to be debated? Like, when is there not
straight away?
Straight away.
Straight away after the signing of the Anglo-Irish Treaty, after the establishment of the Irish Free State and the partition of Ireland into two states.
Yeah.
There is a debate in the GAA in the first years. People come up and say, look, this rule has served its purpose.
Yes.
It was built for a situation where there was no independent Irish state, and yes, we have partition, but now it's the time to get rid of this rule. We need to move on. But for some people, the revolution is only starting, because they did not fight a revolution. They did not seek an independent Irish state just so they could paint the paint boxes green and put the harp as a symbol on top of things. They wanted a living, breathing culture that was Gaelic. They wanted the language spoken. They wanted the music played. They wanted essentially thriving farmsteads around the place, and they wanted Gaelic games. And in this new world, there was not to be a place for the games of the Gaul.
Okay. And to that end, emblematic of that attitude, the vigilance committees are established in 1924.
Yes. Now, there are a series of debates, first of all, and it goes relatively close to being gotten. The ban is relatively close to being removed. It's within a dozen votes or so, but at the same time, it survives with relative comfort at the same time. And vigilance committees are appointed because this is doubling down. It's saying now that, we've a new independent Ireland, but the need for vigilance is not over.
Yeah, we're serious. We're serious about this.
Revolution. Yeah. And you know what? You can say a lot. You can say if we're to be fair here.
Yeah.
And it's really easy to judge from history and say, like, what were they thinking of? And in hindsight, of course, it's straightforward to say that. But you have to say that these people, unlike other organizations, at least actually try to live out the words that they spouted. Now, they may have believed too much. Ultimately, they did believe too much. But they did at least try to pursue the courage of their convictions and their ambitions. They didn't just pay lip service.
Who are you talking about there? Who's the lip service merchants you're having a dig at there?
Well, look at let's look at the Irish language stuff, for example, and people who repeatedly talked about speaking the Irish language and didn't do it. So these are a group of leaders who actually tried to create this idea. We can argue about the legitimacy of the vision, but at least their sincerity, I think, should be acknowledged.
So 1924 Vigilance Committee starts, and this clearly progresses to a point. I mentioned Douglas Hyde at the outset, for instance, who was the president of Ireland, the first president of Ireland, and like a real Gael himself, friends with Michael Cusack back in the day, and he has the temerity to attend an Ireland-Poland match in his capacity as president.
in 1888, as far back as 1888.
Yeah.
Douglas Hyde had written a poem celebrating the hurlers of Ireland. In the 1890s, he had written again and again about how the presence of the GAA, its existence, the people in it, filled him hope for the future of Ireland. He'd been a friend of Cusack. He'd been a patron of the association since 1902. This was a man who had endured, who had been a founding father of modern Ireland in many ways because of his work with the Gaelic League and everything that flowed from a lecture he gave on the necessity for de-Anglicising Ireland. So this is a man who had actually walked the walk and lived the life of it. And in 1938, he was elected president of Ireland, first president of Ireland under the new constitution. And there's a soccer match in Dalymount Park between Ireland and Poland. Now, Ireland had really struggled to get international soccer matches for the first 17 or 18 years of before the First World War, really. Yeah. Like neither England, Scotland, Wales or Northern Ireland wouldn't play them, just simply refused to play what became the Republic of Ireland. But De Valera, himself a rugby man, and Douglas Hyde went to Dalymount and attended this match. And as Cormac Moore, who's written a book about this, has written, the matter was raised. You know, I love that phrase. It was raised at a Central Council meeting. And the president of the GAA, Paul McNamee, said that because of what Hyde had done, he had ceased himself to be a patron of the association. So it was really, so basically that's saying it was, you know, Hyde made his own decision. He went. So therefore he must go.
I quote the Irish Times at the time. So the Irish Times, West Brits that they are, Paul, they obviously took a point of view. They said the notion that the game by which a round ball is kicked only and not punched as well as kicked is detrimental to national culture is, of course, the most utterly childish form of humbug. So, well, of course, the Irish Times would say that. But what did everybody else say?
There was uproar. It was uproar.
Okay.
And Pádraig McNamee is a really interesting man. He was known around GAA circles as a kind of a principled and decent human being. He devoted a life of service to the association. And later in 1938, after the decision, he set out a clear vision of what he considered the GAA stood for. And can I read it out to you?
Sure,
Actually,
yeah. What was his role again? So Pádraig
McNamee.
President. He's president.
Pádraig McNamee, president of the GAA, who was kind of overseeing the removal of Douglas Hyde as president. He said, the critics tell of a wonderful thing called internationalism. The people who talk of internationalism really mean Anglicism. They describe English games as international. They pander deliberately or unwittingly to England's superiority complex. They talk of our bans. Even English critics, though, will admit the superiority of our hurling as a field game. But I wonder how many English colleges have themselves introduced it as part of their athletic curriculum. On one point, though, I agree with our critics, and that is when they say we are intolerant. My only complaint is that we are not half intolerant enough. We and all Irishmen who value the inheritance of the Gael must always be intolerant of everything foreign in this country. We can never rest until the last vestige of foreign dominion is gone beyond recall. I dream of the day when a Gaelic front will come into existence, a front consisting of a union of organisations, each looking after its own particular part of the Gaelic revival, and all united in the ultimate aim, a Gaelic Ireland. It's of its time, you'd have to say, Joe.
It hasn't aged well.
No. And it's a very, very particular speech of the 1930s with all the ideas that swirl around the 1930s. It fits into that time frame.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. It's fascinating to hear it. It's fascinating to hear it. Like I sitting around a pub with that fella, I don't know where you'd start. It's
again, though, it was a mindset that it was a strain that run within the GAA. And the difficulty is, of course, but it does really matter. Those kind of views were the views of a minority, and quite a small minority, but they ran the association.
I understand. Okay.
And
so
that's
then,
what.
So then, have you any sense over these decades, 30s, 40s, 50s? I presume it got bigger as time went on, perhaps. How many people were being banned? I mean, is there someone in every club every week being pinged for going to a dance or going to a match?
No,
or
it's
is it
random? And there are some counties that repeatedly have to be told to put in place vigilance committees.
Okay.
So they're letting them go because, of course, Joe Molloy is the star player down in Kildare, and Joe loves cricket.
Yeah.
And as well as being a member of the All-Ireland winning Kildare senior hurling team, he's also a cricketer who turns out around there, but you don't want to catch him, do you?
Sure.
And that's number one. Number two, you can't legislate for taste. That people wish to try and play different games. People knew of these games. Their friends had played these games. And what was really interesting, let's look at different examples, if you like, of different people who went. The Bank of Ireland, but say you went to work in a bank. And what the story of Irish banks is really interesting in the first decades. I know that's a statement that doesn't really seem to be very attractive, but it's true.
No, to be honest, they have staged pretty interesting, I can tell you.
they have. But in terms of its staffing, the staffing of the banks before independence was heavily Protestant and heavily Unionist, and that really evolved in the 20s and 30s. And it evolved in terms of sport only much slower than that. So the games in the banking cultures were often soccer, cricket, and rugby. But there's a report from 1955 from the Bank of Ireland annual cricket match, where married against single men were playing out in Pembroke Cricket Club. And this is a report that is in the quite ripping Irish Banking magazine, which published a report of the cricket match.
Right.
And it teasingly gave the name of what it described as a star of the GAA as DXN BXXXXY. So it's obviously something Buckley, right? That's it. It's either Don or Dan Buckley. And he played. And this happened as people went out into workplaces, as people moved to cities, as people went around the place, they began to play different games.
And is it possible to detect if was there an air of fear? Like, would me and you, members of the GAA, be going to watch a football match or play a football match because we like football? Like, would we be thinking, God, we're taking our life in our hands here. This is serious stuff. Or was there more of a, look, these vigilance committees, idiots, don't mind them?
Oh, I'll tell you where it was really important. If someone thought it could help them win a match and they knew that you had been at a soccer match or
they
you
try and
had been
get
there,
you. Yeah.
To try and get you. So it was really useful. Like it was a tool to win a match by. The committee room was a hugely important space when it came to controversies around these years. And all the while in the background, you have people breaking the rules, like Paddy Cahill, the Sinn Féin TD for Kerry during these years. Cahill, he used to play rugby under the name C.A. Hill. He wanted to use his own name, but he rugbyfied the second half of it.
Okay.
And so on.
So it was rife.
That's right. Absolutely right. And it is that great phrase that was repeated time and time again about the ban, that it was, and I quote, honoured more in the breach than in the observance. That is to say that there were people breaking it all the time.
And the vigilance committees, were they sending people to rugby matches and to football matches to keep an eye out?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what was going on in the place.
Were there ironically people were there people who really enjoyed rugby and soccer volunteering for these vigilance committees?
Well, there are stories about these. And of course, this is not the thing that gets. You don't have a register of who's gone and who is breaking them, and it's regrettably hasn't properly survived. Or if there are registers of them, they're not obviously found. You see in the minute books references to various things, but as for detailed analysis, it's more perfunctory than it is, really detailed description of it. But it was actually, so the story is that Mick Mackey, the great Limerick hurler, loved rugby, loved soccer, and went to these games, so therefore he had to be put on a vigilance committee. Now, but there are these apocryphal tales, which swirl around the place, whether they're true or not.
We don't know.
It's cloak and dagger the whole way through it.
I'm just operating on the basis of human nature, just human nature being what it is. I refuse to believe there weren't lots of people on vigilance committees who came in after a Saturday at a rugby match and a soccer match and said to their wife, Jesus, they were great games though. Really enjoyed them all. That rugby match, it was a draw. It was a cracker. That you're guaranteed it happened up and down the country.
But isn't that the whole thing? I mean, the story of people who like sport. There are very, very few people who only like one sport.
Yes.
Very few. And there are very many more people though who, if a new sport is invented and is televised and it looks kind of insane, would be glad to spend an afternoon watching it. So again, as you say, the nature of these things, and it's how culture works. Apart from anything else, you start to watch it and you're pulled around it. That the idea that there are silos between things it just doesn't hold water.
So across 50s into 60s, as the end for the ban is approaching, what if there's a single thing aside from the fact that everybody's breaking the rule and that maybe there's not the same kind of thrust of nationalism around, because the struggle in comparison with the early part of the century is redundant. What really hastens its demise or initiates its demise? Yeah.
Two things happens. First of all, Tom Wolfe, Tom Wolfe was sent to a match, a foreign games game, on behalf of the Dublin County Board Vigilance Committee in 1948, and reported a player who he'd been sent to spy on at that game for a GAA player who'd been there. That player was suspended and never returned to the GAA. And Tom Wolfe, who was a parliament, who worked in Dublin Civil Service, it stuck with him. It rankled with him that he had done this.
He felt guilty.
So Tom Wolfe then became chairman of the Civil Service Football Club in Dublin, and he brought a motion to the GAA to have that rule abolished. And he attempted, began at the end of the 50s, he attempted in 62, 65 and 68. The matter could only be debated every 3 years. So he put it back on the agenda in a massive way. Okay. And he gathered people around the country who agreed with him, and there was the makings of a campaign, if you want to call it that, in the same way as you could say that people like Tommy Kennoy from Roscommon were fundamental in making the argument around the opening of Croke Park and other venues. So he is of its time. The second point, though, is, I would argue, the more important point. It is the broad sweep of history, the manner in which the forces of history created a totally different context in which the ban took place. And in particular, I'm talking about television. And in particular, I'm talking about the broadcast of soccer and rugby matches on television. So if you look at 1961, 85% when percent of homes in America had a television. In that year, RTE gets going. There was a slightly smaller percentage in Britain, but it was heading right up towards the American level. And already television had been pushing in by the end of the 50s through BBC Northern Ireland in 53 and UTV in 59. And in 1961, by that point, 44% of Irish homes had televisions. And by the end of the decade, 76% of Irish homes had television. So low 40s in the early 60s, but 76% of Irish homes had a television by the end of the 60s. And in the beginning, all that was shown in terms of sport at this time were the All-Ireland football and hurling semi-finals, more or less, rugby and soccer internationals, and the FAI Cup final. Bit of horse race and stuff like that. So it was a very limited TV diet of sport. But that limited diet basically destroyed the ban on foreign games, because it meant that because you would be such a dynamic individual, you would much prefer to go to watch the FAI Cup finals. You get off your couch and you go to Dalymount Park and you stand there. But I'm a Sunday slob. I lie on this couch. I watch the game on the telly and I'm fine. And it essentially made a mockery of the idea that this was okay, that this rule could actually have a legitimacy, that it could endure because of this. And then in the middle of it, the World Cup in England in 66 was broadcast, many games in Ireland, and soccer gained the profile that it had not had before in Ireland. It's not, by the way, that soccer didn't have a long and deeply embedded history in Irish culture. It did have. It was there from the late 70s onwards, but it never had a profile quite as big as that, which it earned in the 1960s through that World Cup. And there were GAA columnists in the newspapers writing just fantastic columns. There's a guy called An Fear Kuhn who used to write for the Sunday Press, and he talked about the World Cup having, and I quote, "disturbing effects here amongst those followers who contaminate their minds with such world-disturbing, unnatural and degrading recreations."
Yeah. Well, the rule can't survive if you're not allowed to watch a match and you can't police everybody's home. I mean, that's a pretty much
done.
Instant game up, isn't it? Are you telling me Pat Fanning, who we started this with, president of the GAA in 1971, when he makes a speech, are you telling me in a dark room some Tuesday afternoon or Saturday that Pat didn't just flick on there for a quick look? Who's this Eusebio fella I keep hearing about? Who's this Bobby Charlton?
Do you know what? There's an interview with Pat Fanning, or a series of interviews with Pat Fanning, and he's a fascinating man. And there's clearly a lot to him. Like he was an absolute believer. And I would say that it is entirely possible
that
Pat Fanning lived the rule.
Okay, fair enough.
And I actually mean that as a compliment to him.
Yes,
because
he's not a hypocrite.
No, look, no, and he where people lost their way, though, people who support the ban, is, you see someone like Monsignor Hamilton, who wrote a pamphlet in the late 50s and in the mid 50s, where he addressed the idea that people used to throw at him about saying, look, Kevin Barry played rugby, and sure, he's an IRA martyr, and Eamon De Valera played rugby, and sure, he's the uber kind of patron saint of Gaelic Ireland. Sure, can't all be bad. And Hamilton wrote that, they were good Irishmen, but insofar as they played rugby or played soccer, they weren't 100% good Irishmen. And that notion was just run through this.
Yeah. So look, I'm bringing my very easy 21st century view to this. So I do understand we have to judge the rule and the ban by the product of its time, because I mean, what I want Ireland to represent is inclusivity, and whatever you're into, if you're not hurting anyone in life, go for it, and this is the antithesis of that. This is not a society that draws me in at all, the one they're trying to create. So I find it hard to see anything good about it, but I do understand they had their principles and they weren't hypocrites, as you said. So I get it. It's not as straightforward maybe as a casual glance back would suggest.
Well, they really believed in what they were doing. Very many of them really believed in it, and they were undone by time, and they were undone by the world that was shifting around them, and that's not an uncommon story. And but they did have principles, however misguided they were, and it can look incredibly harsh. Look back at from a distance, and how slow they were to change.
Yeah.
Did them no favors, and the language of its time is very different.
Yeah.
And that all things. And again, I'm absolutely not trying to apologize for anything, but I'm trying to set it in context.
No, I think that's right to do, and that's your job as a historian. And I guess when you hear stories like the Liam Brady one, it's kind of indefensible then, I suppose. So am I right to say in 71, even though we associate Congress with votes, that it was so overwhelmingly felt amongst every club who I think went away and debated this, that this rule had to go, that they didn't even bother taking a vote at Congress?
See, in 68, what happened was a motion was passed, which
called on the GAA to set out positively the rule, the reasons why the rule, was valuable. Like, just to look at it, it was seen as an opportunity. But then, in the context of that, it was said that every club should have a meeting. There was a motion passed that every club should have a meeting to discuss that report, which was, again, things. And the minute it went into the clubs, it was just one after the next, like these great celebrated GAA clubs from around the country, Tuam Stars and so on, down the west of Ireland and all around the place. It's almost unanimous in support of the idea of the ban. So by the time it came to the Congress itself, there was nowhere for the defenders of the rule to go. The clubs had said it clearly, and you could not argue the line about the club saying this, that, and the other, and then go against it. You just couldn't do that. There was just no space for that.
Yeah. You said at the outset it didn't fully disappear then in 71. What remnants stayed on?
Well, I think there are two remnants there. The first one is the creation of what became Rule 42, which was the idea that no games should be played. And that's prefigured in Fanning's address, where he talks about us not becoming a mere sporting organization. So there was the creation of that rule that non-Gaelic games, or those 4 foreign games, could not be played on GAA facilities. Now, of course, as we know, you could play American football or you could play baseball, but you couldn't play soccer, hockey, rugby, or cricket according to that rule. So that rule was introduced, number one. Number two, the context of Belfast in 1971 is the context of the unfolding troubles, which meant that rule survived, as in the ban on membership of the RUC, members of the RUC, the British Army or the Navy joining the GAA. That remained in place. And that was only removed at the end of the peace process. And the foreign games rule in Croke Park, as we all know, has only been changed recently. First of all, relaxed initially for the rugby, for the redevelopment of Lansdowne Road, but then subsequently discretion given to the county board. But the other thing that flowed from that period was the charter. And it is worthwhile people having a look at the charter of the GAA, which is in the official guide. And the idea of the association that creates, it's 50 years old, and it is really carrying its weight at this stage. It's showing its age, and it is something that desperately needs to be looked at.
Okay, it's outdated and stuck in a more nationalist viewpoint.
Yeah, it has a vision. It has a vision of a time and a place that will be unrecognizable
now
to much of the membership.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. I mean, I grew up and played soccer and GAA, both very seriously, took up many hours of my life, and bloody glad I could do so. So I don't look back on that rule with any kind of degree of fondness. However, what it does illustrate, in fairness to the GAA, for an organization that is accused of being slow moving in various ways, including even the shape of the fixtures, it doesn't half move a lot. When you stop and look at each passing decade, it's actually a far more fluid organization than we give it credit for with that throwaway line that they're very slow to change. They're actually not.
The amount of the idea isn't progressive in so much of what it does, just doesn't hold water.
No.
So you look, for example, at the GAA was the first one to broadcast its games live on radio in the 1920s. It was the GAA who, like, there was hurling broadcast in New York in the 40s. There is a relentless willingness within the GAA to change in certain ways, and very quickly. And often it is quite modern and quite progressive. When it does get stuck, it really manages to get stuck. And it does have a problem. It does have a problem with confronting the stuff that it can change relatively easily. It changes quickly. The stuff that's intractable, it kind of leaves to collapse under its own weight. And the calendar, again, is the great example of that.
Sure.
Calendar of play.
Listen, that was all fascinating. Is there any last point you didn't get to, or you want to add, or a final thought from Professor Rouse? A la Jerry Springer.
There's a tone to that, Joe, I have to say.
No.
There's a small bit of a tone to that. That's,
no. Look, I liked on Jerry Springer when he would round up the events of the preceding 30, 35 minutes, made sense of them for us. So I'm just opening the floor to you to see if there was any overarching point you want to make, because you've spent a lot of time
I would make a general point about history, which I think we've talked about this before, but I suppose I would urge caution around any cartoon version of history. I'd urge caution around people who want a simplistic view of what Irish history is, and I would particularly urge caution around either the construction of a British imperial fable or an Irish nationalist fable, because the truth is much more interesting and much more interwoven than that.
Okay, very good. Listen, it's always so interesting having you on to explain these things to us. So 50 years on, the anniversary this week from the end of Rule 27, aka the ban. Professor Paul Rouse, thank you so much.
Thanks a million, Joe.